Welcome to the second tutorial on Braille Music Reader 2025. In this lesson, we will see how to navigate within musical scores using keyboard shortcuts. The aim is to learn how to move confidently between annotations, musical objects, notes, chords, measures, and different parts of the score. In the final part, we will also look at the search functions, direct jump, and the main playback options. Before we begin, let us recall the general principle on which navigation in BMR 2025 is based. Shortcuts are organized in pairs of adjacent keys, and their behavior is always consistent. The key on the left moves to the previous element, while the key on the right moves to the next element. Keeping this rule in mind makes it easier to memorize all the combinations we will see, because the underlying logic always remains the same. Let us start with annotations. Annotations are comments inserted into the score, for example, by yourselves or by a teacher, and they are used to add study instructions, observations, or reminders. To move between annotations, use the E and R keys. Pressing E takes you to the previous annotation, while pressing R takes you to the next annotation. Here too, the general rule applies. E, which is on the left, moves backwards, and R, which is on the right, moves forwards. We now move on to navigation between musical objects. When you move between musical objects, the program considers as an object almost everything that makes up the score, notes and rests, but also fingerings, octave signs, slurs, dots, dynamic markings, clefs, part prefixes, chord symbols, bar lines, time signatures, and key signatures. It is not necessary to memorize all these examples. What matters is knowing that you can scroll through all the elements present in the score one after another. To do this, use the D and F keys. Pressing D moves you to the previous object, while pressing F moves you to the next object. We now come to the level most frequently used during study, navigation between notes, chords, and rests. The fundamental keys here are J and K. Pressing K moves the cursor to the next note or rest, and if MIDI playback is active, the element is played immediately. Pressing J, on the other hand, moves the cursor to the previous note or rest, and in this case too, the element is played via MIDI. It is important to remember one detail. If the note you move to is part of a chord, when the cursor reaches that note, the entire chord is played, so that you can immediately perceive the harmony. At this point, we look at a very useful function for analyzing chords more precisely. When you are on a chord, it is often not enough to listen to it as a whole. It can be useful to explore the individual notes in order to understand its structure, the intervals, and the pitches that make it up. To do this, the N and M keys are used. Pressing M moves the cursor to the highest note of the chord, and the pitch is played via MIDI. Pressing N moves to the lowest note, listening to its pitch in the same way. This function is available when the cursor is on a note, on an interval sign, or on signs connected to a note or to an interval of the chord, such as staccato marks, octave signs, fingerings, and more. In this way, it is possible to enter the chord and inspect it note by note, while remaining in the same position in the score. We now see how to move between measures, that is, how to move forwards or backwards following the structure of the piece. To navigate between measures, use the U and I keys. Pressing I moves the cursor to the beginning of the next measure, remaining in the same part. Pressing U moves the cursor to the beginning of the previous measure, again within the same part. This level is particularly convenient when you want to study the form of the piece, revise a section, or quickly return to a point you have just read. If the score contains multiple parts, as often happens in ensemble music or in scores for multiple instruments, you can also move from one part to another while keeping the same measure. To do this, use the O and P keys. Pressing P moves you to the same measure of the next part. Pressing O moves you to the same measure of the previous part. This function is extremely useful for comparing what happens at the same musical moment across different instruments. Let us take a practical example, which is very clear in the case of the piano. In a piano score, the right hand and the left hand are two separate parts. Let us imagine that you are examining the third measure of the right hand. At this point, you can press P to move to the left hand while keeping the third measure in order to listen to and read what is happening simultaneously. Then you can press O to return to the right hand at the same point. In this way, you can check the rhythmic and harmonic alignment between the two hands without losing your orientation. In addition to navigation, BMR 2025 offers some functions that greatly speed up study. The F3 key opens the search function, which allows you to search within the score for a specific sequence of Braille musical signs. The F4 key opens the direct jump, that is, a function that allows you to specify the destination measure and part in order to immediately reach a precise point in the piece. For playback, Ctrl+B starts playback of the entire score, while Shift+B plays only the current measure, sounding all parts simultaneously. This last option is very useful for listening to the ensemble at a specific point and checking how the voices fit together. We conclude by talking about feedback during navigation, that is, what the program provides while you move through the score. BMR provides constant feedback if you have a Braille display connected. The current notation appears on the Braille line. Speech synthesis describes the musical symbol on which the cursor is positioned, according to the verbosity level you have set, and if MIDI playback is active, you will hear notes and chords played automatically every time you move over musical elements. Thanks to these three channels, you can choose the working mode that best suits you: speech only, speech plus MIDI, Braille plus speech, or all modes together. To summarize in a simple way, you can move measure by measure with U and I, change parts with O and P, read and listen to notes and rests with J and K, and explore chords from the inside with N and M. It is advisable to practice these key pairs straight away on a real score, proceeding calmly and repeating the movements several times. After a short time, the logic becomes clear, and the use of the commands becomes faster and more natural.